IB Bio, Ecology, Conservation Option C Part 3 has its focus on the productivity of ecosystems. The significant ideas are: community structure is an emergent property of an ecosystem. Changes in community structure affect and are affected by organisms. Here's an outline of the movies available for IB Bio, Ecology, Conservation. Use this outline to find the part that you need for review. This movie is focused here. In this diagram, you can see two food chains, and each chain exists in a community, which would be a group of populations, different species, living and interacting with each other in a common habitat. Food chains display the flow of energy through the community. A trophic level is a position that an organism occupies in a food chain. Organisms that photosynthesize are the producers. Producers are plants or phytoplankton, algae, that produce their own food using photosynthesis, and they form the first trophic level in a food chain. The first IB syllabus statement of this movie is: a food web shows all possible food chains in a community. This diagram displays a food web involving producers and consumers. We see 4 trophic levels. A trophic level is a feeding level. Organisms at a particular trophic level are the same number of energy transfers away from the original source, sunlight, that enters the ecosystem. Primary producers in most ecosystems convert light energy into chemical energy in the process of photosynthesis. Then the energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. A food web, as seen here, as a model of feeding relationships, better displays the complexity of an ecosystem than a food chain would. For example, many species feed at more than one trophic level. The species here is a third-level consumer along this chain, but only a second-level consumer along this chain. And from an examination of a food web, it should be clear to you that most species occupy different trophic levels in multiple food chains. Here is a marine coastal food web that begins with producers, autotrophs, labeled green for the photosynthetic transformation of solar energy to the chemical energy of glucose. Now, the seal is a third-level consumer along this food chain, but is a second-level consumer along this food chain. The top-level consumers are dependent on the success of many levels below them. This is one reason why top carnivores are more vulnerable to disturbance than other trophic levels. Now, if limpets were removed from the system, the trophic levels above would do less well, while the producers on which the limpets fed would fare better. This is a diagram of a terrestrial food web. You can see the complexity of the system with numerous flows of energy through the system. However, none of the webs that I've shown you so far, including this one, has displayed a decomposer. Thus, here is an example of how a model, as a simplified representation of reality, lacks accuracy. This diagram does display food chains starting with autotrophs, producers, but this diagram also displays detritivores, animals that feed on large pieces of dead material known as detritus, and this diagram also displays decomposers that break down organic matter into inorganic matter. Here's an IB syllabus statement that's important. In closed ecosystems, energy but not matter is exchanged with the surroundings. Now keep in mind that the Earth, as is your mesocosm, a closed system. Light enters the ecosystem, is transformed into chemical energy by the producers in the system. Chemical energy is transferred from one trophic level to another, producer to consumer, consumer to consumer, and at each trophic level, some of the energy is transformed to heat due to the second law of thermodynamics. Heat is transferred out of the system. Matter cycles within the system. Matter remains within the closed system, cycling from the inorganic to the organic and back. Photosynthesis takes up carbon dioxide, an inorganic molecule, transforming carbon dioxide to glucose, an organic molecule. Producers and consumers transform glucose back to carbon dioxide, carbon cycles, as does nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, oxygen, hydrogen. They all cycle within the closed system. In following the flow of energy in ecosystems, you must be aware of two laws, the laws of thermodynamics. The first law is the conservation of energy. Energy can be transformed but not created or destroyed. And the second law is the entropy of a system increases over time. Whenever energy is transformed, some of the energy proceeds towards a less usable form, a less ordered form, known as heat. And as a part of the second law, you could say that an increase in entropy arising from energy transformations reduces the energy available to do work. The first law of thermodynamics is also stated as the law of the conservation of energy. It can be seen, with a bit of imagination, in this diagram. The solar energy absorbed by the chloroplast in a plant is transformed to the energy in glucose. In other words, the quantity of energy, chemical energy in glucose, is the same as the quantity of solar energy absorbed. All organisms transform energy for their own needs and always release energy in a low-quality form. This is the second law of thermodynamics. The disorder of the system increases with every energy transformation. High-quality energy, say in glucose, is transformed into low-quality energy, heat. Whenever energy is transformed, some of it proceeds to a less useful form, a less ordered form, heat. Producers transform solar energy and matter into biomass. Solar energy and matter into biomass. The uptake of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis increases the mass of producers. And the first law of thermodynamics can be easily seen in this transformation. However, plants, like all organisms, use their energy for their own needs, so they respirate. They release carbon dioxide, and this decreases their mass. The mass of the forest depends on the relative rates of photosynthesis and respiration. If the rate of photosynthesis is greater than the rate of respiration, this forest will increase in mass. In this slide, we can see the plant outline here. Carbon dioxide uptake represents photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide release represents respiration. If the rate of photosynthesis is greater than the rate of respiration, the plant will increase in mass, new mass. The growth, the new mass, is the organic matter available for consumers. Gross primary production is the total photosynthetic transformation of carbon dioxide and solar energy to chemical energy of glucose before respiratory losses. In this slide, you can see the input of carbon dioxide, that's photosynthesis. You can see the output of carbon dioxide, that's respiration. Net primary production is the gain by producers in energy or mass per unit area per unit time remaining after respiratory losses. If the plant is to grow, then the rate of photosynthesis must be greater than the rate of respiration. The growth we see in this image is net primary production. NPP is the total photosynthetic input minus the respiratory output. NPP is gross primary production minus respiratory losses. In this image, you can see the growth over time. The new growth seen in this image is net primary production, and NPP is positive because the rate of photosynthesis is greater than the rate of respiration. This graph displays the growth in a bean plant over 24 weeks. The increase in mass over the first 14 weeks is indicative of a positive net production. During weeks 8 to 12, the plant grew 30 grams, so net primary production is 30 grams over 4 weeks. From week 15 on, NPP is negative, as respiration exceeds photosynthesis. In this diagram, we can see a plant community represented by the box, and that community has grown over a 1-year period of time. Thus, the rate of photosynthesis is greater than the rate of respiration. Inputs are greater than outputs. Now let's turn our attention to animals. Animals ingest food, but not all of what animals ingest is digestible, as some goes out with the feces. So the amount of energy taken up by animals is food eaten minus feces. This flow here is food eaten minus feces, otherwise known as gross secondary production. GSP is the total gain of energy or biomass by consumers per unit area, per unit time, through assimilation. This is assimilation, and it's before respiratory losses. Net secondary production is the gain by consumers of energy or biomass per unit area, per unit time, remaining after respiratory losses. You can see respiratory losses here. The new mass is net secondary production. Net secondary production is food eaten minus feces minus respiration. In this diagram, the animal takes in food, high quality energy. Some of the food will be undigested and released as feces. The total amount of energy taken into the bloodstream of the animal is gross secondary production. Then the animal uses some of the energy for its own needs, as you can see here. The animal is spending energy in movement. The animal is respiring. Whatever energy is left over after respiratory losses is net secondary production. Net secondary production is food eaten minus feces minus respiration. In this diagram, we can see an animal taking up 200 joules of energy in a unit of time. 200 joules minus 100 joules of feces is equal to 100 joules per unit time. This is gross secondary production. 200 joules minus 100 joules of feces minus 67 joules for respiration equals 33 joules per unit time. This is net secondary production. The 200 joules of energy taken in by the animal equals all the energy transformed by the animal. New biomass, feces, and energy released as heat. This is the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can be transformed, but it is always conserved. The energy released as heat satisfies the second law of thermodynamics. Whenever energy is transformed, some energy proceeds to a less useful form, a less ordered form, heat. The entropy of the system increases. As a result of the second law of thermodynamics, energy pyramids of ecosystems display progressively less energy available at each trophic level through a food chain. With every energy transformation by every organism at every trophic level, energy is released as heat to the universe. If you look carefully at the quantity of energy available at each trophic level, the diagram implies a 10% efficiency of energy transfer from one trophic level to another. 10% is an approximate generalized value. The efficiency can vary depending on the rate of respiration. A trophic level with active, warm-blooded mammals will have a smaller efficiency than a trophic level involving less active, cold-blooded animals. The percentage of ingested energy converted to biomass is dependent on respiration rate. Here's a chance to practice some of the ideas I've covered so far with a diagram of energy flow through a stream ecosystem. Can you confirm the net production value of -4 kilojoules per meter square per year for the herbivores? The inputs of 2300 plus 18 compared to the outputs of 1746, 208, 337, and 31. The outputs are slightly greater than the inputs, thus -4 kilojoules per meter square per year for the herbivores. The second question is, of all the energy flowing into the herbivores, calculate the percent of energy flowing into the carnivores. It's 208 divided by 2300 plus 18, 208 divided by 2318 times 100 gives a value of approximately 9%. So you should have predicted that this IB syllabus statement was coming. The percentage of ingested energy converted to biomass is dependent on respiration rate. In this energy pyramid, we can focus on the primary consumer here. The amount of energy remaining after ingestion is known as net production, net secondary production, referring to consumers. The percentage of ingested energy converted to biomass, seen here as net production in the primary consumers, is dependent on respiration rate. If the respiration rate is high, then net production will be low. So the explanation for the rarity of top carnivores in ecosystems is the progressive decline in available energy through the food chain due to the second law of thermodynamics. The small quantities of available energy per meter square at high trophic levels can only support a limited number of individuals per area. So that brings us to the next IB syllabus statement. Compare pyramids of energy from different ecosystems. And this is easy because all energy pyramids have the same shape for the same fundamental reason. But not all ecosystems have the same number of trophic levels, and not all ecosystems have the same average net primary production. Stay focused. Net primary productivity varies from biome to biome. You can see that tropical forests have very high productivities. Greater net primary productivity would support longer food chains in that biome. The low net primary productivities of tundra and desert do not support as many trophic levels as the rainforest or as coral reefs. The pyramid of energy for the savanna grassland, like all energy pyramids, is shaped like a pyramid. The pyramid displays a progressive decline in available energy through the ecosystem. The savanna ecosystem has a relatively short food chain with 3 trophic levels. Here is another energy pyramid of a grassland ecosystem. You can see 4 trophic levels in this diagram. Energy pyramids should be displayed as stepped rather than triangular. The triangular energy pyramid, like this one, fails to appropriately display the approximate 10% efficiency that exists between trophic levels in any food chain. The energy pyramid for the temperate forest ecosystem displays a progressive decline in available energy, just like all energy pyramids. Temperate forest ecosystems often display 4 trophic levels. The temperate forest ecosystem could have a longer food chain than a savanna because productivity in the temperate forest is higher than in the savanna. Here is another energy pyramid for a temperate forest ecosystem. The pyramid nicely displays the 10% rule as a general efficiency value for energy transfers through a food chain. The efficiency of transfer is not always 10%. It can be more or less depending on the specific species involved. This is an energy pyramid for an open ocean ecosystem. You can see 5 trophic levels. This is typical of open ocean systems. A stepped pyramid would better represent the approximate 10% energy transfer efficiency between trophic levels. Here is an energy pyramid in a freshwater ecosystem. Like the marine system, the lake ecosystem has 5 trophic levels, and you can see the progressive decline in available energy due to the transfer of heat to the universe under the second law of thermodynamics. As a note, the first law of thermodynamics can be seen as well. The total solar energy taken into the system through photosynthesis will equal the amount of energy transferring out of the system as heat. Remember that net primary productivity differs widely depending on the biome. The magnitude of NPP is a factor in determining the number of trophic levels the system will support. High rates of NPP will support longer food chains. I've come back to this slide to emphasize that the rate of growth of a biotic system, like a forest, depends on the rate of photosynthesis as compared to the rate of respiration. Photosynthesis takes up carbon dioxide while respiration releases carbon dioxide. The change in the mass of this system depends on carbon dioxide. The rate of photosynthesis compared to the rate of respiration determines biomass accumulation. If the rate of photosynthesis exceeds respiration, the forest grows in mass. The ratio of photosynthesis rate to respiration rate is also important to agriculture and the production of food for people. Farmers depend on the photosynthetic rate being greater than the respiration rate. Whether it's crops or cattle, if the inputs exceed the outputs, the system grows. In the case of animal agriculture, the percentage of ingested energy converted to biomass is dependent on the respiration rate. Warm-blooded animals, homeotherms, spend energy to keep their body temperature high. Thus, rates of respiration are higher and biomass accumulation would be lower. Bringing animals to an enclosure that limits movement, as you can see here, would reduce respiration rates, thus serving to increase biomass accumulation, as long as the animals are well fed. Now remember, the percentage of ingested energy converted to biomass is dependent on the respiration rate. Poikilotherms, cold-blooded animals, are more effective producers of protein, biomass, than homeotherms, warm-blooded animals, because the cold-blooded animals have a higher rate of conversion of food to biomass. They are not respiring to maintain a high body temperature. Efficiency in agriculture is defined as the output of desired product divided by the input times 100. But in animal husbandry, the reciprocal of the output divided by input is used in a ratio called the food conversion ratio. Now, the FCR is a measure of an animal's efficiency in converting feed mass into animal mass over a specified period of time, but it is the reciprocal of efficiency. It's the reciprocal of output over input. It is food mass input divided by mass output. In other words, animals that have a low FCR are considered efficient users of feed. This would be typical of cold-blooded animals, the poikilotherms. Animals that have a high FCR are not efficient users of feed. This would be typical of warm-blooded animals, homeotherms. Let me use the food conversion ratio to compare different types of agricultural products. Here are food conversion ratios for various types of farmed animals. You can see that cattle, pigs, sheep, and poultry have the highest ratios, indicating a low efficiency in the conversion of ingested food to animal biomass. These are the warm-blooded animals. Lower ratios found in the farming of insects or fish are typical of decent efficiency in the conversion of ingested food to animal biomass. These animals are cold-blooded. But we must be cautious. Comparisons of the FCR among different species are only useful if the feed type is of similar quality. Cattle farming has a high food conversion ratio, a sign of poor efficiency in the conversion of ingested food to animal biomass. The respiration rates of warm-blooded animals are high, thus lowering the efficiency. Sheep farming has a high food conversion ratio of 5, a sign of poor efficiency in the conversion of ingested food to animal biomass. Pig farming has a food conversion ratio of 3, relatively high, a sign of poor efficiency in the conversion of ingested food to animal biomass. The respiration rates of warm-blooded animals are high, thus lowering the efficiency. Birds are also warm-blooded species, and poultry farming has the food conversion ratio of 3. Insect farming has a low food conversion ratio, a sign of good efficiency in the conversion of ingested food to animal biomass. The respiration rates of cold-blooded animals are lower, thus increasing the efficiency. Fish farming has a low food conversion ratio, a sign of good efficiency in the conversion of ingested food to animal biomass. But fish farming often involves feeding the fish the dried meal of dead fish. This would serve to decrease the efficiency, thus increase the FCR. The fish of the open ocean may have the lowest FCR, the highest efficiency. But we must be very careful here because humans spend a tremendous amount of fossil fuel energy to go out and get these fish. As well, because of our technology, humans have overfished the world's ocean fish stocks. If humans feed lower on the food chain, more energy is available. Thus, more humans could be supported. In other words, if humans consumed all of their food as primary consumers, there would be more food to go around. And that brings us to the end of IB Bio, Ecology, and Conservation, Option C, Part 3.